Welcome to the Social Block, the podcast where we explore the intersection between blockchain technology, society, and cryptocurrencies. Today, we'll be taking a deep dive into how this new technology can reshape our institutions, our individual lives, our culture, and hopefully pave the way to a more equitable and empowered future. I'm your host, Maggie, and today our episode is called Who Owns Your Money with Shahar Zohar from Fireblocks. Hi, Shahar. How are you doing today?
Hi, Maggie. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm doing great. Very exciting.
So, do you want to kick off by giving us a few words about yourself and what you do at Fireblocks, what Fireblocks is?
Yes, excellent. Thank you very much. So, yeah, my name is Shahar. I am a product manager here in Fireblocks. My field of expertise in Fireblocks is Web3 and tokenization, but Fireblocks is much more than that. And essentially, a few words about myself first, maybe. So my background is more in cybersecurity. I was for 5 years in the intelligence division in the Israeli military, and then I moved
Oh,
on
wow.
to cybersecurity in the private tech sector. Did a few things there, mostly in the customer and sales facing roles. And about 2.5 years ago, I was approached by Fireblocks to join. It was only 2.5 years ago, but it seems like, eternity in both Fireblocks terms and the crypto market. And back at the time, funnily enough, I knew nothing about, I heard about Bitcoin and crypto, but nothing more than that. So it was an exciting opportunity. And I joined to become in the product division. And that's my story. I'm going to talk maybe soon a little bit more about what I do in Fireblocks, right? But maybe first a little bit about what Fireblocks is, right? So Fireblocks is essentially the leading platform for custody tech and key management for institutions. So we're going to talk, I believe, very soon about
Yeah, I think there'll be plenty of time to elaborate on that a lot. Yeah.
anything that has to do with storing, securing, and expanding crypto businesses, and anything that has to do with blockchain. Fireblocks is the leading tech provider for that. And yeah, I think one thing that's important to say about this, and I think it's true for me, but it also for the founders of Fireblocks, who also kind of did not come from a blockchain background back when they founded the company in 2018, but from a cybersecurity background. So cybersecurity really is, weaved into the DNA of Fireblocks, and this is where it enabled us really to find success in markets that are led by more, traditional enterprises, all the way from crypto native enterprises, but big banks and financial institutions that have a more risk averse approach. So that really is in a nutshell, about myself and Fireblocks, and yeah.
Yeah, I really felt it when you said, oh, that like those 2.5 years, or I'm not quite sure how much it was, felt like a lifetime in crypto. It's like we're living in dog years, I swear. I joined crypto in 2019, and I feel like that was another life ago. And the thing about the people coming in from TradFi with the, more security and, risk averse approach is just, it's a big thing for us at Nexo as well. So I totally feel you. I think just to kind of facilitate our discussion, I want to make sure that we set it up properly. So let's start with what is money and what is ownership. And where I would define money is just to let our listeners know, we're going to be talking not just about, USD, GBP, I don't know, pesos, fiat money, but we're also going to be talking about different kinds of money like stable coins, USDT, USDC, all sorts of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, digital tokens, and also some more exotic types like NFTs, which technically aren't money, but, we're going to also be discussing all sorts of assets as money. So that's just setting up the what is money part. For ownership, so ownership is by a dictionary definition defined as the act, state, or right to possess possession of something. And I think that's pretty interesting, especially coming from this really big dissonance. There's a huge gap right now between what TradFi considers ownership of money and what blockchain considers ownership of money, right? Because you've got traditional finance where many people don't really, hold cash anymore. What we do is we just stick it in the bank, and that is by definition something called custody, and that's going to be our first kind of big point. So you're actually not in possession of your money, but you own it, right? In traditional finance, whereas blockchain has the exact polar opposite ethos. It's kind of like the North and South pole, right? Blockchain, not your keys, not your coins. That is like the mantra of the decentralized blockchain ethos. And it means that, if you are not the person in possession of your private keys, which is, like Shahar said, this idea that you're the only person who controls this money, you're the only one who can access it or move it or sell it or whatever, then you don't own anything at all. And what's really cool is right now we're seeing this kind of clash of these two paradigms. And we're seeing all these different like hybrid models, crypto companies and exchanges that are technically, operating with custodial wallets like banks, but using blockchain technology underneath. These are your companies like Nexo, Binance, Coinbase. They all operate custodial wallets, but they use blockchain technology and blockchain money like Bitcoin, Ethereum. So yeah, I think we can start there. I think we also, in terms of ownership, will be discussing how monetary policy plays into ownership of funds, and also about who actually verifies, what authority verifies that you own your money, because that's an important aspect. So 3 things: custody, authority, monetary policy. So I don't know, Shahar, do you want to kind of start us off with a little bit about the custody aspect there?
Yes, a lot to unpack. So thanks a lot for these definitions. I think you pointed into something that's very, very interesting. And especially, with the rise of crypto, is kind of comes into the light, which is the difference between ownership and custody, right? So, back in the day when money was, what is money really, is something that we all agree upon that could, is something that we can use in transactions. Okay, so back in the day when it was gold, or even before that, a bunch of goats, right? I gave you a chicken and you gave me a goat, or but
Physical, tangible things.
right, exactly. So this difference didn't really exist, right? Because whatever I owned and people agreed that I owned and it was tangibly in my hand, then I could also use. But it was in my custody in the sense that, I had it. And same goes for cash that you mentioned, right? In more modern times. But really, when money became more and more kind of abstract and detached from tangible things that you kind of
like
hold.
fiat, essentially, paper money.
Yeah, so more and more these came apart, and nowadays, as you mentioned, most of the money that we think that we own, and we do actually own by some kind of definitions, is not in our custody. So even though that I have, for example, I go into my bank's application and I see, oh, I have $100, right? So I'm happy. And I trust that I actually own this money. And I think if I go to the next person in the store and try to buy something, they also trust that I own this money. But it's not in my custody, it's in the bank's custody. And that actually means that, I do own it, but not necessarily control it always.
And that's a little bit dangerous, don't you think? Because, we saw, you have obviously like these age-old institutions, big banks that, Bank of America, Deutsche Bank, whatever, they hold your money, people feel safe with them. But, just recently we saw these like smaller banks like Silicon Valley Bank and Signature, we saw them go down, and it was very stressful for people who had money in those banks, because those banks have their money. And if they're not able to, through whether it's insurance or whatever, give you that money, you're kind of left holding the bag. That's it's tricky as well. This is like the gap with custody.
Right. So that's exactly, I think more now in the light. But even when blockchain was just invented, right? So the invention of Bitcoin famously was Satoshi Nakamoto kind of inventing it, to be an alternative for the banking system where these two are separate, right? When you allegedly own something, maybe legally, so the government and the bank says, yeah, you own it, and the custody of it, because as it turns out, owning something in the fiat world doesn't necessarily mean that you control it always, right? And it could be confiscated. It could be, if I, for example, want to take some money out of the bank and it's, I don't know, it's a weekend maybe, or it's between 3 and 5 or whatever the case may be.
Oh, I actually can't stand that. I hate working hours when it comes to money. It's my money, it's my time.
Right. So really, I think the promise of crypto, right, and the very reason it was invented was exactly that. So I mean, a few different reasons. One of the main ones is you are both the owner and the custodian of your money. The way that crypto does it, as we discussed, is for you to have your own wallet, your own private key that only you know and hold. That, of course, comes also with risks, right? So very famous stories about people losing their private keys to a lot of Bitcoin that nowadays would have been worth a lot of money, just losing it. And since they were the only custodians, so they're the only people in control of this money vis-a-vis this private key, now they just lost it forever, as opposed to some, protections and risk mechanisms that custodians or traditional custodians might have. But so this, it's a very interesting thing that I think oftentimes, for us in the crypto ecosystem is I think more clear, but many people I think don't realize this, that the ownership and custody are not necessarily always the same. And it actually, I think, when you talk about institutions, and this is something Fireblocks caters first and foremost to. Also in this space, I think it's something that's little realized about how many institutions and entities that deal with money are not actually the custodian. So not even your bank probably, or your bank's bank is the custodian of all of their funds.
And that applies to crypto companies as well, right? Like most crypto companies, they don't custody the assets they work with themselves. They use crypto custodians.
So this is a very interesting point because it is true, right? So also in the crypto space, you have this tension, right, between these two approaches. You definitely have companies that say, I don't want to take the risk of self-custody and actually use other custodians. It's something that's very common, and a lot actually of our very big customers and banks are custodians for other crypto companies. So it's there's all kinds of different realizations and aspects and risk considerations, but some companies definitely don't hold their own crypto. The thing with crypto, as opposed to fiat money, is that you actually could hold it and could be your own custodian if you want. And especially given the last developments in the markets, right? Not only, but especially given that, I think we see more and more institutions in crypto companies and even individuals, right, actually understand that maybe putting your assets in someone else's custody is not as safe as they initially thought, right? And maybe self-custody is the way to go. And that actually is where Fireblocks comes in. Fireblocks, important to mention, is not a custodian. So we do not hold assets for other companies. Rather, what we do is provide custody technology. So if you're an enterprise that wants to self-custody, to actually hold your assets, to actually be your own custodian and not have that kind of third-party risk, we provide the technology for you to do it, in a very, very secure and in a very usable and expandable way. So this is where we come in to provide the technology to do that safely, because I mean, there's all kinds of risks, cybersecurity and others, while holding your own assets and your own private key. And this is where we come in.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I think we went over custody quite well, and I think we can kind of move the discussion on to focus a little bit more on monetary policy and also the authority that verifies what you own. And I say this because, we talked briefly about fiat currencies and how actually most banks, technically they custody your assets, right? But we're not really talking about the institutions who define what's going to happen to, say, your dollars or your euros. And those are central banks, right? So they decide, the US Fed just decided, what to do with their debt ceiling. We didn't know what was going to happen until the very last minute. It can be very unpredictable. We see people in Argentina, this is a very good example also related to custody. We see people in Argentina who actually, they hold a lot of cash and they use a lot of cash. Only about 66%, I think, of people in Argentina actually have a bank account, compared to like above 80 and 90% in places like the UAE and South Korea, respectively. And I think there's a reason for that. It's because the monetary policy in Argentina it's not secure for the people, and they know that. So, we see this thing happening in the traditional system as well. Maybe we don't pay so much attention to it. And, I have this information because we're kind of branching out recently into new regions. Latin America is one of them. We're very excited. So we're researching this stuff. And so you have this kind of unpredictable, thank you. You have this kind of unpredictable mode of what governs what's going to happen to your money. And yes, they're not going to, the government, the central bank isn't going to take your fiat currency out of your bank account. But what's going to happen is, what if, they make decisions that devalue your money? They completely, make it pointless that you worked so hard to gain it. So I think what blockchain does there, and I think we can move on to talk a little bit about what governs monetary policy in crypto, is that it's set, with Bitcoin. We know what's going to happen. We know that this currency is going to become harder and harder to mine. It's going to become deflationary. We know exactly what's going on. And, we also know that there isn't one person, Satoshi's not around, sorry, Satoshi, to tell us what to do. It's, a multitude of people making these decisions. And it's like that for Ethereum as well. And, a lot of the digital tokens as well, they have governance functionalities, which allow their communities, even then the token holders themselves, to decide what's going to happen to my money. So I think we can talk a little bit about, with crypto, which the entities that own monetary policy are, because they're really important, like DAOs, founders, miners, developers. And I have one last one that I want to mention, but I first want to get your opinion on this, Shahar.
Sure. Yes. So I think what you kind of expressed there is really, really in line with the sentiment that brought blockchain and crypto to existence, right? So as we mentioned, now we talk about blockchain technology and crypto as something, that's kind of, it's getting more and more mainstream. More people know about it. It's a whole industry, right, that created, trillions of dollars of wealth out of nothing, essentially. But 10 years ago, it was mostly a niche enthusiast thing that really needed some time to evolve. And at this point in time, I think the main sentiment was this, right? With fiat money, we have no control, not really on the ownership and custody that we discussed, but also not over arbitrary decisions made by authorities, made by central banks, made by governments, that would affect the money that we own. So kind of the control of our money is out of our hands. And this sentiment really is what brought crypto to existence. And I think until this very day is something that really drives this whole community and development forward, is the idea that we want things to be as transparent as possible, as in the control of the people who hold their assets as possible, and as decentralized as possible, as opposed to centralized authorities that makes decisions. So I think, yeah, that on the one hand. On the other hand, really for crypto to evolve, and I think we're now in the very midst of this um, process for crypto really to evolve and be widespread, and not just merely an enthusiast thing, which is always going to be. And I think there's always going to be, people who, crypto first, crypto always. Um,
DeFi degens forever.
exactly.
We'll
But
make them t-shirts.
I think the industry as a whole, and definitely us in Fireblocks always talk about, the next billion users, right? Onboarding the billion users to crypto and Web3. And to get to this point, there has to be, and definitely is currently, acceptance and adoption of crypto by those very institutions, right? So it's kind of like there's a tension there between, initial inception and idea of what crypto is, and really the ability of institutions to adapt. And this is a very interesting tension that drives it forward. But I think what we see now, definitely in Fireblocks, is the leading tech provider who serves these institutions, is the realization that there's actually a lot to gain from crypto, both as a monetary tool, but even more than that, right? And
Kind of as a democratic tool.
yes,
Democratizing money, essentially.
right. So it's always going to be a possibility. And you mentioned, monetary issues of people that, unfortunately maybe live in countries where the fiat money is not as stable, and maybe would, and we know there are multiple different examples of how crypto actually helps these people preserve the value of their assets, and get hold of their own, monetary destiny in essence, and kind of link themselves away from the waves of or decisions of authorities that are out of their hands, right? So this is always something that crypto is going to be a good tool for. But nevertheless, crypto is such, advanced and revolutionary tech by itself that, even traditional monetary markets and financial markets have a lot to gain from this tool. And this is something that, more and more of these institutions realize. And not only as an asset class, because, the first wave of institutional adoption of crypto was, okay, oh, there's this new asset, right, that I maybe, could be part of my portfolio, and we can invest in and potentially make some gains. But now it's kind of like a second wave of, oh, we can actually revolutionize money markets and make them, at the same time that we make them more decentralized, more transparent, more,
Yeah, it's this thing. I feel like this is the distinction between institutions adopting crypto and institutions adopting blockchain technology. And I think that's a really important distinction to make. Like, you have one thing, it's one thing, in companies that are huge, like, you've got MicroStrategy buys X amount of Bitcoin. We've seen this news all over. Even like back in 2020, we were getting that kind of stuff. And it's another thing, I think Fireblocks was involved with, like, the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, and kind of having a blockchain solution there.
Yeah, so this is actually very exciting news that very recently broke out, and I think it's an extraordinary example of this, how this combination actually makes sense, right? Because between traditional financial markets and institutions adapting blockchain technology that's really, cutting edge financial innovation. So Fireblocks was part of this massive innovatory move by the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, in with actually the Israeli Finance Ministry, to issue bonds. So Israeli bonds that the finance ministry actually issued on blockchain. And there's all kinds of benefits to that, that we can touch upon in a second. But just like the idea, right, that such an industry that's so I mean, so traditional, and also, when you think about financial markets, are like, old big institutions that kind of move slowly and are very kind of hesitant to incorporate new technology and innovation. But the advantages of blockchain technology really manifest themselves so clearly, that this is something that we've been able to do together. Fireblocks, from the tokenization and custody and security of this whole operation, right? Providing the tech to do so, but really having both the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange and actually all of Israel's leading banks, as well as some international banks, actually participating in the initial issuance of these bonds and buying these bonds on chain. Um, and we believe is an example that we're going to see more and more of, traditional finance tools moving to blockchain technology for better transparency, better settlement time, more security, and really, kind of revolutionizing this hundreds of years of old of industry.
Yeah, the old banking system. This is the thing, though, that I think goes a little bit underappreciated, is that you actually have those players already. It's like you've got Nexo, that's been essentially working as, offering financial tools for the blockchain space. And we've got, our whole technology layered using blockchain and automation and all of those perks that you just listed. And there's companies that are already doing that, but they started with that, they led with that, and now you've got like the older, bigger companies also kind of getting into it as well. So I think definitely we're at the cusp of really revolutionizing the technology behind our banking system, our monetary system. And the stock exchange example is like just a really good one of how it can be, like, blockchain can really be embraced. And it's nice that they turned to Fireblocks as well, like a blockchain native company, because they're going to look for our expertise, right? So we're right here, all of us.
Oh yes, definitely.
Because we were talking about, what governs monetary policy in crypto and everything, and kind of mentioned DAOs. Those are DAOs for people who don't know, decentralized autonomous organizations, and they function primarily through, governance. So if you own a certain amount of an asset, you have a right to vote on what happens in the system, what happens with, the asset, the whole ecosystem. And I think that that's a great feature of blockchain, and in general, like the whole decentralized finance system in terms of deciding our own monetary policy. But we can't deny that, there's certain blockchains where, like with Bitcoin, miners sometimes, not that they get a say, but, they're influential in what happens to, updates to Bitcoin's blockchain, because we need to differentiate, obviously, the cryptocurrency from the blockchain. You've got developers as well, because what happens to blockchain finance also depends on the people who are able to code it. But the last one I kind of wanted to say was whales. And, whales are people who own very large amounts of certain cryptocurrencies. And I think that something to be conscious about. I'm very pro crypto, very pro blockchain, but we have to be conscious that when we have a democratic system where votes are based on how much you own of an asset, essentially what your stake in it is, where if the 1% decide that they're going to buy a lot of this asset just so they can get what they want, we're screwed. So we need to be conscious of whales. And I have examples for this as well, that are not direct, like this person owns a lot of this crypto, so they skewed the vote. It's more of a, like, imagine Elon Musk, right? He, in 2021, he tweeted BTC with a broken heart emoji, and the market melted. And then a few months ago, he put Doge instead of the Twitter logo. And I'm sitting there being like, oh my God, Doge just jumped by X%. So we need to be kind of conscious of these big fish that are also influential in monetary policy, right? And what happens to your money. Musk can't decide what happens to Bitcoin because it's all set, but he can influence it because he's influential. And it goes beyond just owning a lot of Bitcoin. It can literally be having a lot of influence in society. So we need to see that as well. I want to talk a little bit about, I guess, stable coins. Specifically, I know that they're a little bit of a specific crypto asset because they are pegged to currencies. The most popular ones, USDT, USDC. You've essentially there got a private company that's also like an intermediary between, I guess, the like if it's USDT, it's the US dollar, right? Tether pegs each Tether token is pegged to $1. That's great. And you're both being influenced by the Federal Reserve. And then though, like Tether is a private company, even though you have some kind of like contract with them for, the money that you've paid for your Tether, there's another, like suddenly another force there, another power. What do you think of that?
Yeah. So great question and great topic. I think stablecoins are really an interesting thing to look at in terms of everything we just discussed, especially the benefits of blockchain technology as opposed to the looking at benefits of crypto or crypto assets or crypto markets, right? So just for those who don't know, stablecoins essentially are tokens that are issued on the blockchain. It could be in various different blockchains and are pegged. So their value is actually pegged to another asset's value, and it's done in different means. Different companies actually peg their tokens, and if we talk about, I mean, the most famously, right, tokens that are pegged to the US dollar, right? So crypto token that's on chain, and the value of which, hopefully, right, is always $1. The means in which they do it is it varies.
The hopefully in there is just it kills me. It's very accurate, actually.
Yeah, I mean, if everything goes well, right?
Theoretically.
If we talk specifically about stablecoins that are pegged to fiat, interestingly enough, I think a huge portion of transactions on blockchains currently actually are stablecoin transactions. And it's interesting because it's actually using blockchain technology to move around traditional assets, right? So even if some institutions, for example, or individuals don't necessarily trust that crypto per se, right? So maybe Bitcoin is too volatile, or maybe, right, they don't want to invest in something they're not certain that the price will stay the same. But as a tool, as an instrument to move money around, that's actually, in blockchain technology, is actually way more efficient, both in terms of costs and efficiency, than any traditional tool. And so we can talk specifically about these stable coins, the pros and cons. Sometimes some of the way to keep the value of a stable coin, and the traditional way is actually to have $1 for each stable coin that you issue. This is something that happens, for example, with Circle, who issue USDC. So they would have $1 fiat dollar in the bank for every USDC that they issue, but there's also ways to do so.
Yeah, so I kind of want to play devil's advocate here, because what's interesting about what you're saying is that the majority of transactions are, essentially in, I think, what was it, USDT and stable coins, right? So we're actually, people are naturally moving towards using blockchain for fiat transactions or fiat-based transactions. And that's great. It means that, people have this like intuitive use of blockchain technology for the purposes that it serves. But we have obviously the stable coins that are pegged to the dollar in the more traditional way. And then you've got this like third counterparty, like it's Circle with USDC, Tether for USDT. And what's interesting is that those stable coins over time have shown to be more stable, I guess, than assets like, dare I say, something called UST. This was Terraform Labs algorithmic stable coin. So the way that stable coin kept its dollar peg was through an algorithm, and it was also, I think, like, not to explain in too much detail, also tied to the Terra network's native asset Luna, and it crumbled really fast due to volatility. It was very scary. A lot of people lost a lot of money holding a stable coin. So it's interesting how, although technically an algorithm should be safer, and like blockchain's ethos is like algorithms are safer, with stable coins that have, kind of proven themselves over time, where we have like not just a government that can kind of fiddle with what's going to happen to the money. We've also got a private company that standing in between a situation in which we had an algorithm failed. I'm not saying that that's not going to fail, that things are going to fail always. I just think that like we're still in the very like beginnings of algorithmic stablecoins. It's just interesting because it turns out trusting an institution in this case was maybe a little bit better than trusting an algorithm.
Yes, I think one of the main takeaways there, and really something that's very important to say about blockchain and crypto as a whole, right? You're always going to have to trust something. There is going to have to be trust there. The question is, A, what this entity is, and B, how can you actually verify that it's trustworthy? So, for example, those different issuers of stablecoins, right, that are famous, and there are actually many, right? But there are some private companies that really issue stablecoins and that have remained stable for a while. But the other extreme example, as you mentioned, is UST that completely collapsed, taking the whole crypto industry with it.
It took our heart and soul, guys.
Yeah, yeah. So really, always you're gonna have to trust someone, whether it's a bank, whether it's a government, or whether it's a company that issues a stablecoin. The main question is, and what blockchain is really solving here is not, I think before the Terra issue, and even nowadays, people say like, oh, blockchain is you trust the code, and the code is safe, so blockchain is safe. And that's also only half of the story. The other half of the story is you have the fact that you can verify and you can know what will happen and what the code is, etc., is a big advantage, but it doesn't mean that everything will be okay. It's on you to always verify and always understand, where you put your assets and who is the entity that you're trusting. What really crypto enables you to do, and blockchain as a whole, is to
do your own research, do your own verification, because it's a publicly accessible ledger, right?
Exactly. Whereas and actually see, oh, how much, who is this company? How much reserve do they actually have? How is this stable coin issued? What are the risks there? And this is something really that people actually did not do much with UST, and we saw the results. But people who actually did, and there were some who actually did, and were like, oh, this is never going to last. This is very, very risky, but they could do it, as opposed to some other things that are not in blockchain, and potentially would be like, but how do I know in the future that someone would not issue many more dollars, and the value of the dollar would decrease? There really is less of a way to know that. So I think if there's any advice or any takeaway we can take of this whole thing about stablecoins, but also in general, is always make sure that you know where the risks are. And if you invest in something or you put your assets somewhere, know the pros and cons, and really do your research about who it is that you're trusting with your money.
And you're always going to have to trust someone, right? So I kind of want to move on from stable coins into, I guess, our more exotic type of asset class, NFTs, non-fungible tokens. And I think that comes with, I guess, a little bit of a veer of the conversation into Web3. So I guess, what are applications for Web3 ownership of assets? How can Web3 be applied in terms of ownership of assets?
Yes, great subject, and my favorite as a product manager in the Web3 unit of Fireblocks. So very happy to talk about this. I think the first thing that maybe would be beneficial is to talk about what Web3 is, right? I think it's also become a kind of a buzzword many people throw on. But what is it really? Why do people call it Web3 as opposed to Web2 or Web1, right? So in a nutshell, Web3 is essentially an internet that's based on blockchain, right? That's essentially what it is. So
the internet on blockchain?
in a nutshell, right? So if
No, I like the nutshell. I just didn't hear you properly.
Yes. So essentially, different types of applications, of web applications, but that, instead of usually in traditional applications such as, I don't know, Facebook, I want to post something, I click post, and then you see it in my profile. But really, what happens is there's a whole bunch of computing happening in Facebook servers, right? If these servers go down, or if Facebook decides to delete my post, or whatever the case may be, the data in the service is actually centralized. Whereas with Web3, the same web application would actually create a transaction, and would be based on blockchain technology. Most notably, smart contracts. So smart contracts, maybe just like in a nutshell, what it is for those who don't know, programs that run on the blockchain in a decentralized way. And so Web3 really is this enablement. I think when we talk about Web3, what really a lot of people comes to mind is, and you mentioned it, NFTs. When people talk or think about NFTs, I think popular view would be, oh, it's a bunch of JPEGs, right? That have
monkeys.
And you can own monkeys for somehow very confusing. But NFT is actually a revolutionary technology that I believe, and maybe many people in the industry believe, that could really, change the whole way ownership on the internet works. So we can take it anywhere from here. But that's really just
Yeah, because NFTs are essentially non-fungible tokens, right? They are tokenized assets that are non-fungible. And I seem to remember, like in late 2019, late 2020, it was a big deal that, gold was being tokenized. But gold is a fungible asset, right? So any like 1 ounce of gold is equal, supposedly, if it's the same quality of gold, to any other ounce of gold. Whereas non-fungible tokens means we're tokenizing assets that are unique, right? So you can tokenize your house, you can tokenize your car, your shoes. So I think like a good question for someone like Shahar here is like, what is tokenization? If we think of NFTs as also a form of money, of an investment, how can tokenization help us with owning assets?
Yes, great question. And I think when we talk about NFTs, what's important to realize is that the technology, as you mentioned, is the ability to really own something that's unique, but in the digital world. It's something, maybe we can take a second to think about it, because the very idea is something that up until now was not really possible. I could own something that's unique, but there always again would be someone that would have to say, you're actually the owner of this, whether it's a government, whether it's some kind of authority. And NFT, so we can talk about art being until now the most prominent use case, where an artist could have a piece of art and tokenize it on the blockchain, meaning you could of course copy the same monkey 1,000 times, right? It wouldn't even matter. But you could actually verify that this specific token is the original one, right? You, based on blockchain technology, so the artist in this regard would have their own private key, and they could actually sign, or issue this very token, that even if someone else would issue an exact same, picture, it would not be the original. So the idea that a digital asset actually could be verified. Now, even though until now it was, the most prominent use cases, art, maybe music, artists kind of using this tool to, for their benefit. Really, the potential of this technology is way beyond. And you mentioned some physical assets in the real world that could be tokenized, but even before that, right? Even if we talk about, for example, something that's very much relevant nowadays, and Fireblocks also taking a key role there, is identity management. So let's say now you want to prove that you have this identity, right? Or that you have...
I want to prove that I'm Maggie.
Exactly. How would you do that? So currently,
I'm the real one.
Currently, what you would do is you would say, here, I have this ID. And you can see here that it said that was issued by my government. You trust my government, and you see that this is my face on this ID. So there you go. Actually, for someone to actually believe that you're a Meggie, they would have to either believe that piece of paper you're carrying, or ask, the government in some digital way, hey, I have this person here. There's always a third party. There's always some kind of authority you have to trust. Whereas imagine if this person could actually see, oh, this identity that Maggie holds digitally was signed by a key that I know is, being held by the government.
Yeah, I think that's really actually a great application of Web3 identity. I think that's going to be a huge deal in the not too distant future. I actually think that a lot of companies are already working on it. And it comes back to that question we talked about, ownership, in the beginning, where you need to really be aware of which authority is actually, verifying your ownership of something, including your identity, but it applies to your money as well, right? If you have a government identity, or, government issued money, then you trust the government to verify, that you have this identity. But with blockchain, we remove that, and you have a publicly distributed ledger that can verify that this is your identity. And I think, just to give people an example of why that's so important, and why I think we should move from a centralized government verification of ownership of certain things to a decentralized one, is so everybody knows Elon Musk. I feel really bad mentioning him twice in a podcast, but Elon Musk gives me anxiety, so I dream of Elon. But the thing is, when he took over Twitter,
I know that there's a question: if there was ever a podcast where Elon Musk was not mentioned, was it really a podcast?
I know, right? But the thing is, when he took over Twitter and he decided, I'm taking away blue verification marks, and he took them away. And, obviously he wanted companies and people to buy them. That's fine, it's business. But he took them away. And I think it was KuCoin that got hacked. People got hacked and scammed because he took companies who had their identity verified on Twitter. He took that away. So people no longer had that marker for this is the correct company. And so many people got hacked and scammed and stuff. And, that's just not nice. So that's one of the dangers of having a centralized entity verifying people. When it's decentralized, nobody can come in and be like, I own this blockchain. So, all of you are not, legit anymore. Your identity, not yours anymore. Your money, not yours anymore. So I think that's just a good example to illustrate what's going on there.
Yeah, and it's actually, I think, it's an interesting example to actually kind of hypothesize what if it was a Web3. So what if Twitter was a Web3 company, right? So let's say it was, and let's say your profile on Twitter actually was, you connecting with your own wallet. So that would be your identity. And you could, for example, pay with some tokens to have NFT that verifies that you is yourself, right? So that kind of verification. So I imagine this blue check would be an NFT that you hold. Any tweets that you actually would tweet out would also be tokenized, right? So each of the tweets would be your own NFT that you hold in your account. And so,
like copyright.
Yeah. So, and if we imagine that type of scenario, what we can understand is that really, even though that we would have a platform, so Twitter would still be a Web3 platform that does exactly what it does today, right? People could tweet and exchange ideas, etc. But the content and the identity of yourself on this platform would actually be owned by you and not by Twitter. And so in this regard, for example, let's say someone like Elon Musk came in and said, oh, I actually really think that we should get rid of these, chips, blue chips. So maybe they would be able to take it out of the front end of the application, right? But never could they actually take the token away from you. So the identification and the verification that you have it is part of your wallet, part of your identity, and they can't take it away. So anyone who actually wants can check and see that you were verified. Moreover, if we keep this, keep going with this hypothetical, or not so much hypothetical anymore, but with this brain exercise. So let's say that now you kind of I get the feeling that we're not Elon Musk fans in this podcast, right? So let's say you're not a fan, right? And Elon Musk came into Twitter and you're like,
Let's say I'm neutral.
right. Um,
I'm Switzerland.
Switzerland. So maybe you weren't really sure and you said, okay, I want to try a different platform, right? That's not Twitter. Let's call it Schwitter. So I would go and post on Twitter, right? So now what happens is if I were to do it in Web 2, I would actually have to go and create a new account and have, 0 followers and no, social capital, and all my tweets would remain in Twitter. Whereas if I wanted to try Twitter as a new Web3 platform, potentially I could just, with the same identity that I own and the same tweets that I own as NFTs, and even the verification, right, just migrates to this new platform and have everything there, right? Because my content and my identity and my social capital actually would be mine as part of my identity and wallets, right? And the platform would merely be hosting myself and my assets and my capital instead of owning it, right? So this goes back to what we started with about ownership.
Yeah. Ownership and capital, and that it can be more than just money, like your intellectual capital. It's a big deal.
Exactly. So I think this is a great example of what Web3 aims to do, which is to move more and more of your digital assets and identity to be owned by yourself and not by the platform that you're, using, even if it provides, whatever services or benefits. But the assets that are yours really to be owned by yourself in a way that no one is able to actually take it away or tamper with it.
Yeah, definitely. So I think since we're kind of running out of time, we can go into some last words. So for you guys, I think this discussion has been really cool and informative. And I think one thing to come out of it definitely is that your ability to own completely and custody all of your funds, your assets, and your intellectual capital is actually a spectrum, right? You have a choice in today's society, or at least most people with access to internet and a phone will have a choice. You can put whatever amount of your money you want in your bank, full custody. You can self-custody things on chain, including even your art, your tweets, whatever. Money ownership is a spectrum. Shahar, do you have any last words before you and I go and start a new startup called Twitter for Web3?
I mean, no, let's go. Let's do it right now. What could go wrong? Yeah, no, just I think on your last comment, just to say that the everything we discussed between custody and ownership and what it means to own your money, right, is something that was always there, but just now with crypto and with the recent developments in the market comes more and more into light, and people more and more actually start to understand and care about what they own, how they own it, who actually controls their assets, and be aware of the spectrum of capabilities and options that they have, which maybe back in the day they weren't really aware of. So as you mentioned, there's a whole spectrum there, right? You can give full control of my assets to an entity. I can have full possession. But I think, interestingly, and this I think a good note to finish with, crypto and blockchain technology actually allows this spectrum in a very wide variety of options, merely because it's first and foremost set by code. So just to give an example, right, I could have rather easily facilitate a reality where for each and every transaction, or for each and every thing I want to do with my money, both me and you are going to have to sign it off, right? And so we could potentially have 100 Bitcoins, which nowadays is a lot of money. For those of you watching in 2210, a lot of money, 100 Bitcoins. And we could actually set up a situation where programmatically no one would actually be able and no, and as opposed to like a law or a regulation, no one can actually change it, right? So programmatically, the code enforces both of us to agree on each and every transaction. That is a very interesting situation where now who owns this money? Do I own it? Right? Do you own it? Is it mutual custody?
Mm.
Right? So, and this is a very simple setup. There could be like way more advanced setups where really custody and ownership of assets is becoming something that's more custom, maybe, and more fluid, and a lot more options rather than either myself or someone else. And it's all I'll finish with that it's all being enabled by this really amazing revolutionary technology of blockchain. And this is just like the tip of the iceberg, I think, of what we can do with this technology. And here at Fireblocks, we believe that really this market is very much at the inception and will really change the way that we look at money and assets as a whole.
Yeah, personally, I can't wait, especially with like all this customization that you just mentioned of how, customization of money ownership options that will really aid us in like our dance between trust and self-sovereignty. So yeah, I think we can wrap up there. Thank you so much for joining us today, Shahar, and I hope to actually be in touch with you in the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was great.
Alrighty, that was our episode with Shahar Zohar from Fireblocks today. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about who owns your money, and a couple of housekeeping things at the end of the episode. If you have any feedback or you're interested in giving us a topic that you want me to explore here on the Social Block, email in at socialblock@nexo.com. You can also reach me personally on Twitter. My handle is at Hristova Maggie. That's Maggie Maggy. It's all in the description, so you should be able to find it really easily. And other than that, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you next time. Bye.